Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Coherent Coder. In this episode, we are going to be looking at printf function in depth. So, let's roll that intro. So in this video, I'm going to be adopting a different format. We are not going to be seeing any presentations, but instead we are going to directly jump into the coding part. So let's first go and create a new source file. So you go to File, hover over New, and then click on Source File. So now that we have created a new source file, let's go ahead and include the header files. So as I mentioned, we are going to be looking at two functions from the stdio.h header file. So for that reason, we are going to be including the stdio.h header file. So we are going to say hash include stdio.h. Okay, so now next we are going to declare void main function. Void main normal brackets, then flower brackets. Then make sure that this flower bracket is on the new line. This will help us understand where the void main function starts. Okay, so now we are going to declare few variables. I'm going to start with an integer variable. I'm going to say int I equal to 10. Then I'm going to say float f equal to 10.45. Then I'm going to declare a double variable, double d equal to 1000.5690. Then I'm going to declare a character variable. So if you remember, when assigning a character to a character variable, we have to always give it inside a single quote. So I'm going to say D here. Okay, so this entire part is declaration of variables. Okay, so now that we have declared all these variables, let's go ahead and print the values on screen. Okay, so we are going to write printf for each of these variables just like how we did in the last video. So I'm going to say %d, which is the format specifier for int. Then I'm going to put a comma and then I'm going to mention the variable name. Next, I'm going to do the same for float. %f is the format specifier for float. Next, I'm going to put the format specifier for double, which is %lf, and I'm going to mention the variable name d. Next, I'm going to mention the format specifier of character, which is %c, and I'm going to put the variable name, which is c. So now with this we have written the code to print all the values. Okay, but we are forgetting something. If we print all these values directly, then all of these values will be printed in the same line. So to avoid that, just like we did in the last video, we are going to put /n here, here, and here. So if you remember /n, whatever we print after /n goes to the next line. That is the reason we have put /n here, here, and here. But since we are not printing anything after the character value, so we do not need to put a slash in here. Okay, so with this our code is ready. So now let's go ahead and compile it. So now when we try to compile, it will ask us to save the file. So go to save as type, select C source files and give it a name. I am going to give it a name of printf underscore scanf. Okay, and I'm going to click on save. So if you remember earlier, we used to go to the execute menu and click on compile and run. But there is a shortcut to do this. So we have the compile icon here and we have the run icon here. So you can click this icon to compile and you can click this icon to run. That is what we did right now. We clicked this icon to compile. So now that we have compiled the code and there are no warnings and errors, we are going to run the program. So you can see that all of our values are displayed correctly. Okay. So we have seen this in the previous video itself, that we can display the values in this way. But we are going to try something new here. So you might be wondering what will happen if I put a different format specifier for printing the integer value. So let's try it. In place of %d, I'm going to put %f. Okay, and I'm going to compile the code. We get 0 errors and warnings, so we are going to run the code. So you can see that the integer value is 0. It is all zeros. That is because integer value and float value, they both store different kinds of values. So since they store totally different kinds of values, converting between these two types is difficult for the compiler. And that is the reason you see that when we try to print the integer with the float format specifier, it does not give us the correct value in the output. Okay, so in the similar way, you can try it even with double. So we can compile it again and then we can run it again. You can see that even with double we get the same result. That is because double and float store similar kind of values. So whatever you get with the float, you will get with the double. Okay, so float and double are incompatible with the integer data type by default. Okay, so we are going to change this back to %d. So now let's try the same thing with the float value. Okay, so in place of %f, I'm going to put %d, and then I'm going to compile the code and then I'm going to run the code. So you can see that now the integer value is displayed correctly, but the float value is totally incorrect, right? This is because float and integer store different kinds of values, so they are incompatible with each other and conversion between them is very difficult. So now that we have tried this, let's see how we can use different format specifiers to print the values correctly. So I have %d here, right? So instead of %d, I will give %ld here, which means we are trying to display integer value as a long int. Now let's see what happens. So we are going to compile this and then we are going to run this. So you see that we get the correct value. And this is because integer and long int store the same kind of values. The only difference between them is their range. Okay, so now we are going to try something else. So instead of long int, I'm going to try to display it in short int. Okay, so now I'm going to compile again and then I'm going to run again. And you see the same result again. So this is because even though short int can store less amount of data, this value is still under its range, right? So let's try to increase the value. So instead of 10, we are going to put it as 100,000. Okay, so now let's try and compile and then run it again. So now you see that we are getting some random value in negatives, which is not the value that is supposed to be displayed. This is because we are exceeding the range of short int, and we exceed the range of short int, we will get results like this. This is why knowing the range is important. Okay, so now we will change this to percentile d again, and if you compile and if you run it, we see that we are getting the correct value again. Okay, so now we close this, and now we are going to try something else with float. So we tried converting the float value into an integer value, right? So instead of that, let's see what happens if I put percentile LF here instead of F. That means I'm trying to display float value as a double value. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to compile this and I'm going to run this again. So you see that it is displaying the correct value. This is because just like with integer and long int, float and double store the same kind of values. The only difference between them is range. So as long as you stay within the range of double, you can get the result that you want. Okay. So now that this is clear, now let's go to the most interesting part, the character value. So if you remember from the data types video, I told you that the range of character is minus 127 to plus 128. So you might be wondering why we have that range, right? So I'm going to show you that. So in place of percentile C, I'm going to put percentile D. That means I'm trying to display the character as an integer value. Okay. So let's revert this first and put, and then compile and then run the code. Okay, and you see that we get a value of 68. Okay, so you might think that this is a random value, right? So let's try to do something to find out if it's a random value or not. So I'm going to change D to C, and I'm going to compile it and I'm going to run it again. So earlier you saw that the value was 68 when it was D. Now when we changed it from D to C, we get the value of 67. So with this we can surmise that this is a consistent value. This is not some random value that is being displayed on screen. So why are we getting this value? So if you remember, I told you about ASCII values, right? So ASCII values are values which are assigned to each and every key on your keyboard. Okay, so there is a value for small e, there is a value for capital E, and both of them are different. Okay, and whenever we try to store a character in C language, it is stored in the form of this ASCII value. But when we try to display it on screen, so depending on how you want to display it, it will convert that value into character. Okay, so if you put percentile C here and try to display it, it will show it as character. But if you put percentile D and try to display it, it will show up as the actual number that is stored. So this is how character value is stored in C language. This you should remember. Okay. So now that this is clear, we are going to see something else. So till now we were displaying one kind of value in a single printf statement, right? For example, here we are only displaying integer value, but we can also display multiple values in a single printf statement. So let's see how we can achieve that. So here I'm going to give a space, I'm going to put percentile F here, and then I'm going to put a comma here, then space, and then I'm going to give the float variable name, which is F. Okay, so with this we are going to compile the code and then we are going to run it. So now you see that we are displaying the integer value as well as the float value. Okay, so this is how we display multiple values in a single line. In a similar way, we can also display double value, which is percentile LF, and we are going to display character value, which is percentile C, and here we are going to put a comma and we are going to give the variable names for double and character. Okay, so now if I compile again and I run the code, you can see that we see the integer value, the float value, the double value, and the character value. This is how we can display multiple values in a single printf statement. So in a similar way, we can add more information to this. Okay. So instead of just displaying the values, we are going to also display some text. So I'm going to say the int value is, and then I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to say the float value is, then I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to say the double value is, and then I'm going to say the char value is. Okay, so now we are going to compile it and run the code. So now you can see that whatever we have written was displayed as it is, except the format specifiers. So what is happening here is, in place of format specifiers, the value of the variable is shown. But apart from that, everything else is shown as it is. So whatever you write will be displayed as it is, as long as it's not a format specifier. If it's a format specifier, then the value of the variable associated with it will be displayed. And also remember that the order of variables matters a lot. So here we have written percentile d, right? So this should confirm with the type of variable here. So since percentile d is the first format specifier, so the first variable that we put should be an integer variable. So similarly, percentile f means a float value. So since this is the second format specifier, so the second variable should be a float variable. So in a similar way, the third variable should be a double variable, and the fourth variable should be the character variable. So if you do not put it in the correct format, for example, if in place of I put F, and in place of F I put I. So if I do this and I try to compile and run the code, you can see that we get some random value and then we get zeros. This is because it is trying to display the float value as an integer, and it's trying to display an integer value as a float. So make sure that you do not mess this up. If you like this video, then leave a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you want to see more videos like these, then subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon. Thank you and happy coding.